everybody, and welcome to Summer Scene. Once again from St. John's, I'm Karl Wells. Many years ago, I walked into an art gallery that used to operate in the Avalon Mall here in St. John's, and I saw for the first time the work of my guest today. I was very impressed, have been a fan ever since, and I'm happy to say he's getting better all the time. At painting, that is. His name is Karl Stevenson. He paints everything from Morton's Harbor and the Outer Battery to citrus and melon and paper bags. That's quite a variety. Karl's work, by the way, is also a part of the permanent collection of Memorial University and of the collection of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And in case people think they've seen you someplace before or on television before, perhaps you can tell us now where that was.
Yes, on All Around the Circle some time ago. I played for 5 years on bass with Don Randall in the group.
And you play as well with the Newfoundland Symphony Orchestra right now, don't you?
Yes, I play string bass with them now, yes.
Karl, by the way, is a physics teacher at the Fisheries College in St. John's. But it's the painting we're going to talk about today. Karl, you are a self-taught artist. Now, I'm curious to know what that means exactly, because when I look at your work, I see work that is incredibly detailed, work that looks, and this is a compliment, as though it were done by some kind of a photographic process. It's so real. How does one achieve that? How do you learn to do that sort of thing by teaching yourself? Surely you need some kind of help.
Oh yes, well, my father paints as a hobby. He started quite some time ago, and then as a child I observed him. And they say there's a certain amount of talent there, but it's a lot of hard work too. It's been a long time coming up to this stage anyway, and I'm sure I still have a long way to go. When you're self-taught, you attempt things. Sometimes you have a lot of failures, and you just keep at it.
How many years have you been painting?
Oh, actually in oil since I've about 12.
12 years of age?
12 years of age, yes.
Okay, well, let's take a look at some of your work now right away and see exactly what sort of stuff you're doing. What are we looking at now? This
is a charcoal. It's one of my medium. It's of an old barn out in Summerford. I try to pick different areas of the province, especially when we're out on camping trips. I'll get the camera out or sketch, whatever the case might be. And this is in size, it's about 14 by 17 inches.
What are some of the other mediums you work in, besides charcoal?
I do oil on canvas and oil on panel, wood panel. I do watercolors. I think the next group will probably be watercolor, and also etchings. This is watercolor, a couple of old cork floats that we found on the beach at Lumsden North last summer. And I just grabbed them up, took them home to my studio, and painted them up with watercolor.
Do you use mainly the brush with the watercolor, or do you sometimes use a sponge?
I use brush with washes, as it's termed, and you outline it very lightly with pencil beforehand, just to give you an indication of where you're going, and you develop it from there.
Would that be the same type of water paint that we used in school when we were kids?
Similar to that, of a better quality, and the brushes, of course, would be a better quality.
What is that stuff in the cans, the powder?
I'm not sure. I think it could be gouache, it could be just...
I know there was a type of material that we'd use. It was in a can, and you mixed it with water, and it was like watercolor.
Yeah, it's a watercolor, but it's more of an opaque watercolor. I think that is. You'd never... Well, I wouldn't use it for my artwork anyway. Some people do, though.
Yeah. We've got some other works here on the table, and these are etchings.
These are etchings. These are done off copper plates. The old method that Rembrandt used to use, where you use acid to etch out the fine lines, the actual process is almost too long to go through right here, but eventually you come down to a point where you print on dampened paper from the copper plate, and you can run off a series. Well, I do a series of about 30 for each plate, after which you destroy the plate, and you number each proof that you take off.
What are we looking at here?
This is the Pinn's Old Mill in Harbour Grace. That's my hometown. It's an old mill that was used for sawing wood, and I thought it would be an interesting subject to do.
We've got another one here. Now, this is the
Of course, the well-known pitcher plant.
pitcher plant, and there's a bit of a story behind the pitcher plant.
Yeah, each exhibit, I started off with an oil, which we'll see later on. I've done 12 exhibits now, and number one on each exhibit, it's like a good luck charm or a mascot, whatever. I find the pitcher plant, I will do it, and each one is different.
How has it been working for you, your good luck charm?
Very well. I have no complaints at all.
Speaking of your exhibits, where do you exhibit your work?
My own exhibits that I've organized myself have all been at Holiday Inn. The first exhibit was in '74, and and I've had them yearly, around April or May each year, and the last one, of course, May of this year. And my dad and I had one in a joint exhibit at Harbour Grace I think 4 years ago, in the fall of the year. And I have exhibited with the Newfoundland Art Gallery Association at the Arts Culture Centre several times. And last year in March, the Munn Gallery did a one-man show with my work down at the Bond Street Gallery.
Tell me about your father's work. Is that a style similar to your own, or?
I don't think so. Dad painted quite a bit, and then he stopped for a while. He was an insurance agent, of course. He came through the Depression and things, and I think he stopped painting for a while. He got back to it about 10 years ago, and he hasn't painted as much as I have. And I think bringing up the family and the times that were at that time, I think he had to neglect his artwork.
How do you go about deciding what you're going to do a painting of or a sketch of?
Well, I shouldn't say I'm a sporadic painter. Most of my painting I do between January and May, but I will probably not paint for a month or two, and during which time I'm planning exhibits. For instance, I'm planning next May's exhibit right now. But as to the topics, I usually write down a list of different things that interest me, and I develop the theme, sketching and what have you. And then I'll select as I go which one turns me on for that particular week or frame of mind I may be in.
You use a camera as well.
Yes, that's quite a bit.
What do? You travel around and take pictures of things that you think might make good paintings, or
yes, I will go on little forays, especially in old St. John's, around St. John's area, and there's a wealth of material in the old little back alleyways and things of St. John's. It's really something else. I wish I had more time to spend in these areas.
Well, perhaps we can show another one of these. This is another etching.
This is called Salt and Pepper.
And we've got some people in this one. Salt and Pepper. Is this any person in particular, or is it a creation of yours?
Well, actually, this man, we met, I think, about 1972 out in Whiteway, near the Provincial Park there. And I took some pictures of him. I didn't use him as material till 3 years ago when I started on etchings. And of course, the Salt and Pepper had. And I just threw in a piece of driftwood. It's one of those things that you kind of develop as you go. Composition-wise, I'm not too happy about it, but it makes an interesting thing, I think.
When did you start doing the etching?
About 4 years ago.
Now, you work from a copper plate.
Yeah.
When you do these. Is that a process that you taught yourself, or?
Yeah. Yeah, I read up on it and developed. I'm sure I'm breaking every rule in the book, but it turns out not too bad. People seem to like them. And
we're going to look at some of your oil paintings now in a few moments. These are photographs of the works which you've sold over the years. You're a physics teacher at the Fisheries College, and I find it very interesting the fact that you have that leaning towards science, but yet you're also a musician and a painter. Do you ever see a time when there's a marriage between those two leanings? What I'm thinking about is last week I heard on the radio an interview with Alec Colville, the famous Canadian artist, and he said sometimes he feels that he's more of a mathematician than anything else because he goes through a very mathematical process when he produces a piece. He works from a grid and plots everything out mathematically.
A lot of perspective in his work, yeah. Well, if you look at history, and people like Da Vinci, Ben Franklin, Samuel Morse, I'm sure there's lots more others who have the scientific bent and also are artists. But it's amazing you can use the science in your art, in particular with the color and lighting and just the physical world itself. You know, if you're going to put something too heavy on a pedestal, it's going to break. You don't do that. And so with the physics side of it does help out.
I didn't realize that Ben Franklin was a painter.
I'm not sure about that. I seem to remember something about it. Samuel Morse was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course Da Vinci.
Da Vinci.
Yeah.
He didn't paint all that much, but he invented a lot of things.
Right. We're going to look at some of the oil paintings that you have here now. And of course, here's the picture plant
Picture
again.
plant. It's one of 12. A different interpretation, shall we say, and I do a different one every year.
Now, would you have worked from a photograph, for example, with this one?
I do, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to have the actual thing on hand. But I do work from photographs. Of course, you know, it's in January, so most times.
It's pretty cold for outdoor work. But do you ever get an opportunity to take the easel out and actually paint on the spot?
Yes, but you can only do little tiny ones, about probably a 10 by 12 inches, and you have to work fairly fast. The climatic conditions change here very rapidly. And you can't really go back the next day, I find, to do it again. You have to do it. It's a really impulse painting. But you can take that back to the studio and develop it further, which I have done.
It's pretty hard to handle the big ones, I guess, outdoors like that.
Wind would be a problem.
Sure,
more than anything else, yes.
Yeah. That's why whenever you see a documentary or whatever about a painter, he's usually carrying a pretty small canvas and putting it in his knapsack.
That's right.
Let's go to another painting here now. What are we looking at now?
This is in Bowring Park. It's the falls in South Brook, just on the old Squire's property. People don't realize sometimes the beauty we have around St. John's in our rivers and small lakes.
Could you give us an idea, Karl, how large that would be?
That, I think, would be a 16 by 20 or an 18 by 20, somewhere around that size, I think.
Mm-hmm. When and where do you paint, usually, when you're home?
I have my own studio now, but one time I shared a workshop with a cat and several other things, and I put on 2 layers of clothing to keep warm, and I still use the 2 layers of clothing. It's just I'm not comfortable, at least oil painting, but when I go to watercolors and drawing, I really get cleaned up, but I really look sloppy when I'm painting oil.
You worked in the basement first when you started painting. How was the lighting? Did that pose any problems?
I've always used for painting a single 250-watt bulb over my left shoulder. I find that the yellow tint to it, that's where people are going to look at the paintings in their homes rather than daylight.
Yes.
And if you get the colors reasonably right there, then they should look right in the home. Okay,
let's go to another one.
Yes, there's a story behind this one. This I called A New Day, and I had originally titled the thing A Brass Bed. You may be able to pick it out in the background there. I'd waited several years till I found a model for this, and my wife Wendy and we were at a Christmas party at one of my colleagues' homes, and their daughter had a little friend there, and she was only 12 years old, Nadine Deverell, and I was looking at this little girl and I said, whoops, there she is. So I asked her mother if I could paint her, and I told the situation I wanted to paint her in, And of course, you immediately think of all kinds of ideas, but I convinced them that I should take some pictures, and that's what developed, where a girl about 12 just awakes and looks out through the window. And at the same exhibit, I did a portrait of her, unknown to the parents, and it wasn't for sale, of course. And when they came to the exhibit, I let them know that that painting was theirs, and here it is. Which actually I like in some ways better than the other.
What was their reaction when they saw this?
I think they were quite happy, as I was too, at the reaction.
Do you always work with the brush for the oils? Do you ever work with a knife? Or?
Palette knife. I've done, I think, 3 palette knives. I like the brush, though. I like the brushwork. But the palette knife, I find, I am a bit sloppy, but but the palette knife might be a little bit too sloppy.
Yeah, I've seen some of those palette knife pieces, and I honestly don't know how they can do them. When you look at them up close, it's just a
blob.
A blob.
Yeah. I think they use the experience of the viewer. And as you move back, you see things there that aren't actually there, but...
It's incredible, though, the difference when you do stand back 8 or 10 feet and see, the remarkable difference from, being up close. Let's go to another one.
This is an example of some of the wildlife, still life I do. 2 partridge here with a copper pot, and some paraphernalia behind there. I try to use a Newfoundland motif in most of my still lifes, whether it be a boiled dinner or fish and brews or fish and chips. I did 3 tours one time hanging, and then 3 tours baked in a pot, a couple of rabbits hanging, all of these different ideas.
That's beautiful. All of these are very beautiful.
Okay.
Karl, do any of your children paint?
All 4 of them.
All 4 of them?
Yeah, we have 3 boys and a little girl. Our older boy, Christopher, he's got 2 drawings or 2 paintings. I haven't even seen them. His school teacher took them and sent them off to the Canada School competition, and now they're on permanent exhibit at the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto.
Do you ever, do they ever come to you for advice and guidance?
They look. They look and they ask sometimes, but I think they're picking it up as I did from my dad. They come in. Timmy, the youngest boy, he will come in and he'll look, and he'll always want to see every time the painting that I did. And little Rachel and John, they're into it. And perspective, for some reason or other, just seems to be natural with them.
Okay, let's show some more.
There's Dr. Aldrich.
Portrait, yes, that fellow looks very familiar.
I don't usually do portraits. Portraiture is something that's really, I think you really have to develop a technique for, but they asked me to do a black and white drawing of their Airedale Terrier, and I said, okay, I want to do a portrait of you. And I said, you don't have to have it or anything like that, but it just as a study, and I just like drawing him or painting him. He's got an interesting face.
Do you ever get nervous at all about the reaction you might get from some of these people when they see the finished product?
No. I try to paint for myself rather than for the people, and if I do a commission for somebody, I'll say, well, if you don't like it, that's fine. Maybe someone else will.
Yeah. Do you try to get a representation of the person that is almost photographic, or?
Oh, when I do a portrait?
Yes.
Well, that's why I say I don't do a portrait to try to get a representation. I try to do it as a character study, as I see the character, rather than trying to get a pictorial photographic representation. That, I think, is a very specific talent that really has to be developed.
Now, we're going to show this one.
This is a Bristol Soap.
Is this the one, perchance, that was presented to Prince Charles and Princess Diana?
Yes, I was fortunate with this one. of course, as you know, I'm from Harbour Grace, and the committee out there for the 400th celebration, they asked me to paint a painting which would be presented to the Prince and Princess at the reception there, and I decided to do Bristol Soap. It was between Harbour Grace and Carbonear, a lot of tradition there. So this is the one I did.
Were you there, Karl, when it was presented?
Yes, and my wife and I had a very nice chat with the royal couple.
What did they have to say about the painting?
They liked it. I was quite pleased, quite pleased.
I'm sure you were. When and where can people see your work, if they want to see some of your stuff?
There's etchings at the Spurrell Gallery in Longs Hill, at the Creekside Crafts, in Corner Brook at the Ewing Gallery. There's one of my paintings now at Spurrell's. Other than that, they're in private homes. There's 4 in the Workmen's Compensation Building.
Okay, and you're still working on them, I guess?
I'm still working, yes.
Okay, Karl Stevenson, thanks very much for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Summer Scene from St. John's, and I'm Karl Wells. Good day.